It's him!
Far Cry has always been about travelling through exotic locations, packing lots of guns, and battling with endless mobs of soldiers, animals, and everything in between. Over 17 years, we've been treated to huge open worlds, all with epic vistas and stunning scenery. Set in locations such as beautiful tropical archipelagos and the freezing heights of the Himalayas, to the dense forests of rural America and the scorching savannah of Africa, Far Cry games have never been one to shy away from using the best graphics at the time to make the world seem as real as possible. While Ubisoft remains tight-lipped on the future of the series and when we can expect the next entry, we're looking back at the graphical advancements that made this beloved series constantly one of the most beautiful on PC for almost 2 decades. Starting, of course, with 2004's Far Cry.
I suggest you search the huts for weapons and equipment.
Developed by CryEngine developers Crytek, who would go on to make the seminal Crysis, few games at the time could touch Far Cry for its combination of huge draw distance, complex shaders, and detailed textures. It looks surprisingly good, even by today's standards, and that's because Crytek pushed the limit on what could be rendered on graphics cards at the time. Of course, no modern GPU will struggle, but back then, Far Cry could easily bring any gaming rig to its knees, and the highest quality settings were very much for future generations of CPUs and graphics cards. Ubisoft cut a deal with Crytek for the ownership of the full Far Cry IP, along with a permanent license to CryEngine. But for the next release in the franchise, its coders stripped out and rewrote large chunks of the game engine. With a new name of Dunia, the upgraded engine would be used to power the larger and more complex world of Far Cry 2. The savannah of Africa might not be as richly detailed as the equatorial islands, but that doesn't mean it's easier to handle. Ubisoft's Montreal studio worked hard to make Far Cry 2's fully open world, instead of the visually open but gameplay narrowed landscape of the original game. The shader system had to deal with dynamic weather and day-night cycles, destructible environments, and fire that could realistically spread across large patches of wilderness, as well as the vast draw distance. It might not seem particularly huge when viewed with 2025 eyes, but in 2008 it was stunning to see. For the 2012 release of Far Cry 3, Ubisoft significantly upgraded its Dunia engine to cope with a return to a tropical island setting. The work resulted in Dunia 2's rendering pipeline using approximated dynamic global illumination and multi-layered materials to display objects, water, foliage, and even the sky as physically accurate as possible. You might not notice radiance transfer probes and spherical harmonic coefficient matrices involved while you're gunning down a mob of soldiers in an enemy base though. As with many games of this era, multi-sample anti-aliasing was still the favoured way of getting rid of the jaggies. But along with, let's be honest, overzealous screen space ambient occlusion, Far Cry 3 could easily grind down your GPU if you went too hard with the settings.
Eliminate Omega Force cyber soldiers quietly.
Far Cry 3 introduced a greater emphasis on chaotic fun, but Ubisoft caught us all off guard in 2013 by ramping this to 11 in the standalone Far Cry Blood Dragon, a neon-soaked romp dripping in 80s B-movie nostalgia. From a graphical perspective though, Ubisoft didn't introduce anything new with regard to the engine. It might not look it, but Blood Dragon is essentially a reskinned Far Cry 3, albeit with a much smaller map.
I'm touched that you would save your betters.
Dunia 2 was further improved for Far Cry 4, though not massively so, as the developers only had 2 years to do it all in. But even so, the coders still managed to upgrade the physically based material system, indirect lighting routines, and environment map refresh rates, as well as vastly improved foliage rendering and anti-aliasing. The switch from multi-sample anti-aliasing to temporal anti-aliasing might not have won over graphics purists, but at least now you could wave goodbye to the jaggies without waving goodbye to your frame rate. Game-wise, Far Cry 4 is a more refined version of number 3, just as vast and as beautiful as ever, but with arguably better combat and vehicle mechanics. No vast though, even though Pagan Min steals the show every time.
I'm so glad we're finally back together.
Far Cry 4's engine and map were used once more for Ubisoft's next Far Cry standalone, Primal, set in Stone Age Europe. So, no new rendering tricks, though the developers did create a working fictional language, including 3 separate dialects. Once Primal was out of the way, Ubisoft's graphics programmers in Montreal, Toronto and Kiev set about reworking Dunia 2 to make it even better at handling a realistic open world for the next entry in the franchise, Far Cry 5. With a focus on improving the terrain, water and overall lighting, the end results are spectacular to say the least, and the valleys and forests of Montana look almost as good as the real thing. While it wasn't doing anything new as such, Far Cry 5's engine was vastly better at producing dynamic global illumination, shadows and reflections than any other Far Cry game before it. The realism of the world is more than just the rendering of the graphics though. The scale of the world's interactivity, character animation, facial movements, AI pathfinding and vehicle physics all play an important part. For all Far Cry 5's beauty, it doesn't feel quite as real as it could do. 2019's Far Cry New Dawn was planned as a smaller project right from the start. With a map far more concise than Far Cry 5's, there's considerably less to do and explore, and in terms of graphics, nothing new was brought to bear. Just a reuse of the same mechanics and some assets to tide you over while the next major Far Cry game was being developed. That said, the base building element was new and gave Far Cry New Dawn a better sense of who you were trying to help out, rather than just being a lone warrior out to wreak havoc on the hordes of baddies. At the time of making this video, 2021's Far Cry 6 is the most recent entry in the series. Its superior rendering pipeline included support for ray-traced reflection and ultra-high-resolution textures, making the islands of Yara look genuinely stunning, especially with the setting of the sun. But its level of interactivity was no better than that of Far Cry 5's, and when it comes to fire mechanics, Far Cry 2 still rules the roost, even today. So what's next for Far Cry? It's been 4 years since the last major entry, so you'd be forgiven for thinking we're overdue. But given Ubisoft's recent financial woes, the series is on hiatus until the publisher can be certain of a hit. One thing looks likely though, Far Cry 7 won't be developed in Dunia. In its 2022 financial report, Ubisoft set out its intention to progressively sunset the Dunia engine and instead focus on 2 of its other in-house engines, Anvil Next and Snowdrop. So it's to these 2 engines we need to look if we want to guess where Far Cry goes next graphically. You can be sure that ray tracing will take center stage, to take the lighting, shadows and reflections to the next level of realism. But will it go the Anvil Next approach, as seen in Assassin's Creed Shadows, where ray tracing is selective and limited to the base building bits? Or will it follow in the footsteps of recent Snowdrop games like Star Wars Outlaws and Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, which had ray tracing always on? With a bit of luck, we might also be treated to better levels of interactivity, fully destructible buildings, and larger teams of companions to make battles more tense and chaotic. In the argument of graphics versus gameplay, the latter wins every time. But for the Far Cry games, the former is crucial to giving the games the expansive feel of being able to do anything you like, anywhere you like. Without huge draw distances, you wouldn't be able to spot enemy bases and plan your attacks properly. Without realistically rendered water, stealthy ingress via swimming or strafing battles on boats wouldn't feel right. Without dynamic lighting and daylight and weather cycles, base attacks would be far too repetitive, turning the big open world into a grinding chore. A great game is more than just its graphics, but for the Far Cry series, they're integral to making them what they are. Chaotic romps through beautifully realized digital worlds with ludicrous shootouts, memorable characters, lots of guns, and, most of all, the freedom to do all of that, or just sit back and enjoy the views. For more deep dives on your favourite games, subscribe to PC Gamer.